Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Real Canadian Liberal podcast, video log podcast. We'll do some interviews. We got a couple people lined up, hopefully for the not too distant future. But in the meantime, there'll be a few little podcasts here. And you can find us at locals.com, at realcanadianliberal.locals.com. You can find us at realcanadianliberal.ca or realcanadianliberal.com. That's website I started a couple of years ago. Slowly adding to it, but it's been a slow process. That's mostly political philosophy. That's where I wanted to go initially. But the events of the last year pushed me more towards science and empiricism, so we'll get back to that. But this is where we're going to start. We'll start in the last year, and then we'll go back to that kind of stuff. On Twitter, Real Canadian Liberal. Its Twitter handle is at RealConnectLib on Twitter, and the page on Facebook is at Real Canadian Liberal. Also on Parler. Where else? I don't know. Somewhere else. I'll put some links down below, and you can figure that out. Anyway, I'm your host, Stu Stoudinger, and who am I? Well, I'm a regenerative rancher in central Alberta. But technically, making up the term conservation rancher. Why do I call it conservation ranching, not just regenerative ranching? And is because we use wild species to do it. So we have plains bison. We had the first DNA tested plains bison herd in Canada. That's public or privately owned. Ours was the first, and we're major contributors to the CBA's genomics program, so we developed a new genomics tool to be able to track diversity and genetics within bison, that kind of stuff. So anyway, we take those animals and we use them to manage our landscape. So I'm an applied scientist, raising good food in the process. I started off... I joined the Royal Air Force back in 1992 as an air reservist, went to university in the UK, did a applied science degree. I've got an honours degree in aeronautical engineering from the University of Loughborough. So atmospheric physics, atmospheric chemistry is where I started off. So a little bit of a divergence now that I'm in biological sciences, but it's the same thing. It's just a scientific method. And anyway, into the Royal Air Force as an aircrew officer, retired from full-time service in 2013 as a flight commander and an instructor on helicopters in the UK. As you can see, there's a few pictures back there. It's my office wall. And then I joined the Royal Canadian Air Force Air Reserve for 3 years, so finished up in March 2017, flying helicopters in the Canadian Forces. And since 2017, now I've been back at the family ranch. We've started a butcher shop and pantry market, local sourcing, supporting regenerative agriculture where we can, and species-appropriate diets. We've got lots of people with autoimmune disease, metabolic dysfunction, that kind of stuff, and we supply food specifically for their needs. And so that's where we're at. So in summary, I'm an environmentalist, making a business at trying to fix this small piece of the environment, managing ecosystem processes and concentrating on biodiversity and restoring soil health and everything else using wild animals, as the bison are a wild species, and we have mule deer and reindeer, white-tailed deer and all that kind of stuff here too. So we've got all of the natural species with the possible exception of plains polar bears, but we do have wolves, we do have cougars, we do have coyotes, we got all that kind of stuff. So they're not in big packs around here in the case of the wolves. They're in smaller groups, but we have most of the native species for the parkland region, Aspen parkland region of Alberta. And we manage the ecosystem using the bison, and all the rest just come along. So it's really kind of neat. So that's where we're at. That being said, I'm a father of 3 young kids, and our society has decided to go off the rails. It's probably the best description, the most generous description I could give it in the last year. Legally, scientifically, philosophically, gone completely off the rails. We've got major proportions of our government are now operating as criminal gangs, completely outside the law. People say, oh, it might be a bit harsh, but no, I'll get to that in the future videos. But it's criminal. Now, was it criminal initially? No, it's probably just negligent. But certainly by when all the non-pharmaceutical interventions started being brought back in whenever, September, October last year, it was definitely criminal by then. The jury had returned, and everything they did in the spring didn't work, and they would decide to try it all again. So that's criminal negligence at the very least, but the fact they're breaking the law makes it, not good. So that's why I'm back at this. I wanted to start this as a political philosophy channel. We'll get to that maybe, but in the meantime, we got to talk about reality and the reality of what's happened to our society in the last year, looking at the science. And I call it a liberal podcast because I'm a liberal. And I'm talking about a real liberal. I'm not one of those Paytanist fascist types who characterize the current Liberal Party of Canada. I wouldn't vote for them if you paid me to it. They haven't been liberal since the late 1960s. In fact, many of the liberals in the Liberal Party of Canada left the Liberal Party of Canada in the late 1960s because the then leader wasn't a liberal. He was a Paytanist, which is not liberal. In fact, it's the diametric opposite. It's an authoritarian ideology. Liberalism is precisely the opposite of that. So, anyway, we'll get to that. But that's why I've called the channel what it is. So it has a socio-political color to it. But science is where we're going to start. So, where are we going to go with this podcast? Well, we'll get to the political philosophy stuff. I still want to cover that kind of stuff. I still want to address the fact that half of our society is completely ill-educated in how our society is supposed to work and how our legal structure is going to work. But the case study of the last year will be perfectly good in it, highlighting a lot of that, and then we'll go into the details later. But anyway, this last year prompted me to finally get a microphone, this thing right here, and a decent camera. Well, we'll see if it's decent. I'll let you guys report back on that. And we'll run through 2020. So we'll start off with that. We'll run through the scientific principles that should have governed our lives for the last year, but didn't. We'll run through the legal principles that should have governed our lives for the last year, but didn't. And we'll look at some of the medieval superstition and the criminally negligent stuff that has happened in the last year. And then we'll look at some of the danger behind the ideas that have forced us down this road and why we've ended up in this anti-scientific lunacy. And then we'll see where we go from there. Well, that'll be a good start. And we can have some debate and stuff. And I'm aiming for locals.com to be the place where everyone can get together. We can all share ideas, and you guys can critique me on where I think we've gone wrong or right and how we can fix it and vice versa. So aim for locals.com for that one. But feel free to comment in YouTube. I won't necessarily be able to respond to all those comments, but hey, don't get yourself blocked from YouTube, is all I can say there. Go crazy, but not too crazy. Does that make sense? But yeah, if the channel starts to get a little bit knocked back because of that, because of comments down below, then the comments will just end up getting straight because, we've got important information to get out there. There's lots of people suffering in the world right now, and we got to help them. So try and keep the vitriol to a minimum. If you want the vitriol, feel free to come over and let's be civilized about it, but strong. Come out with your strong opinions at locals.com. That's the goal. Okay, so that's the introduction and a snippet of where we're going from here. In the next video, I'm going to introduce the problem by looking at a research study that was published in 1973, and it'll be a good way for us to highlight where we've gone wrong with what we call NPIs, or non-pharmaceutical interventions, or lockdown measures, as everyone calls them in the colloquial world. But yeah, NPIs, where we've gone wrong, and how we knew they'd go wrong before we even tried them, and how they continue to go wrong. And we'll look at that in the next video. So that next video, we'll look at a study from Adelaide Island, British Antarctic Survey Research Station in 1968, published in 1973. So anyway, if you stuck with me this long, then you'll know where to go from there, and we'll see you in the next video. All right, thanks very much, and catch you later.